Hi, enjoy listening. Rachel Monroe closed the heavy office door behind her, her cheeks still burning.
Ms. Monroe, you're free to go. Let's hope we won't have another disagreement like this again,
Principal Everett had said, pursing her lips in that tight, dismissive way that ended every conversation. Rachel bit the inside of her cheek to keep from saying something she'd regret. She fought hard to get this teaching job, and it would be foolish to lose it in her first semester. But that didn't erase what had just happened. The incident replayed in her mind like a bad film. Tyler Donovan, strutting around the cafeteria with his tray, pouring his carton of chocolate milk over a small, timid first grader, whose only crime was wearing second-hand clothes. The girl had frozen, eyes wide, before bursting into tears, while the rest of the table snickered. Rachel hadn't even thought. She grabbed her own carton and, in one fluid motion, tilted it right over Tyler's head. The boy had gasped, dripping brown liquid onto his designer sneakers. "Oh no," she'd said, feigning clumsiness. "Guess my hand slipped. Sorry, Tyler." The cafeteria had erupted in laughter. For once, the untouchable had been humiliated. But within half an hour, Rachel was called to the office. Tyler's father had shown up in a storm of expensive cologne and indignation, and now Rachel was standing outside Everett's office, her stomach knotted. She pulled her jacket tighter around her shoulders as she stepped outside into the late September warmth. The school was only a 10-minute walk from her apartment, but instead of heading straight home, Rachel wandered into the nearby park. She needed air. She needed space to breathe before her anger swallowed her whole. Halfway down the tree-lined path, she froze. Laughter. Harsh, mocking laughter. The kind that wasn't about joy, but cruelty. She followed the sound to the edge of the pond, where a group of teenagers loitered, tossing crumpled bills into the murky water. And diving after them, soaked, shivering, desperate, was a little girl who couldn't have been older than 8. Rachel's stomach twisted. They were laughing at her, paying her like she was some circus act. And then Rachel saw him standing a little apart, watching with uncertain eyes. Ethan Blake, the older son of Richard Donovan. She'd seen him briefly at school events. His clean-cut clothes, the way he carried himself, like he knew he was better than everyone else. Something in Rachel snapped. She dropped her bag and ran forward, pulling the girl out of the water. The child's lips were blue, her tiny hands clutching the wet bills like they were life preservers. Rachel stripped off her own jacket and wrapped it around her trembling shoulders. "What are you doing?" Rachel shouted, glaring at the teens. "She's a child!" One of the boys stepped forward, smirking. "Mind your business, lady. We're just having fun." Rachel stood her ground. Fun? Watching a little girl freeze to death. "Go home before I call the cops." The boy sneered and raised a hand as if to shove her into the pond. But he never got the chance. A strong grip yanked him back. The boy yelped as his arm was twisted behind his back, then shoved roughly to the ground. Rachel turned. It was Richard Donovan. The businessman's polished shoes sank into the mud. his expensive suit jacket unbuttoned. His jaw set with quiet fury. "Who's your father?" he asked the boy on the ground. "My dad's Tom Ignatius," the boy stammered. "You know him. He's on the Chamber of Commerce." "Good," Richard said flatly. "Tell him Donovan says hello." The boy's face drained of colour. His friends fell silent. Rachel didn't waste the moment. She grabbed the girl's hand and pulled her away, both of them half running down the path. The child stumbled along beside her, still shivering, but not resisting. By the time they reached Rachel's apartment, the girl was pale and exhausted. Rachel filled the tub with warm water, coaxing her in while she made hot tea with honey. The child's name, she soon learned, was Grace, and her story was enough to make Rachel's heart ache. Her mother had died years ago. Her father lived with a woman named Julia, who drank too much and hit her when she refused to call her mum. Grace had tried to skip school that morning because she had no clean clothes. She thought if she collected enough money, maybe she could buy something for herself. Rachel sat at the kitchen table across from her, fists clenched under the table, trying not to let her fury show. And then, just as Grace was nibbling her third sandwich, the doorbell rang. Rachel opened the door to find Richard Donovan standing there with his son Ethan. "Good evening, Miss Munro," Richard said smoothly. "We'd like to apologise." Rachel gripped the edge of the door, unsure whether to shut it in their faces or let them in. Richard Donovan stood tall, the late sun catching on his polished shoes. His teenage son Ethan shifted uncomfortably beside him, hands stuffed in his hoodie pocket. "We'd like to apologise," Richard repeated. His voice was calm, controlled, the voice of a man used to smoothing over problems. Rachel crossed her arms. "Apologise? Your son humiliated a first grader today. And those teenagers at the park." "I know," Richard cut in, his tone firm but not unkind. "I saw enough. Ethan was with them. And that's exactly why we're here." Rachel's eyes flicked to Ethan. He didn't look angry, only embarrassed. For a moment, he reminded her of a little boy caught with his hand in the cookie jar. With a resigned sigh, Rachel opened the door wider. "Fine. Come in." The Donovans stepped into her modest apartment. The living room smelled faintly of chamomile tea. From the kitchen, Rachel heard Grace's small voice humming nervously. Richard's gaze followed the sound. "Who's here?" Rachel hesitated, then answered, "A little girl, Grace. She's from a difficult home situation. Those kids at the pond were tormenting her." Richard's jaw tightened. He looked older in that moment, like a man carrying more weight than he let the world see. In the kitchen, Grace sat at the table, still wrapped in Rachel's oversized robe, her wet hair combed back. When she saw the strangers, her eyes widened, hand instinctively clutching her mug like a shield. "It's okay, Grace," Rachel said gently. "These are visitors." Richard crouched down so he was at eye level with the girl. His voice softened, almost surprising Rachel. "No one should ever treat you like that. I'm sorry you had to go through it." Grace blinked, unsure how to respond. She finally whispered, "They threw the money so far. The water was freezing." Something flickered in Ethan's eyes. Guilt. "Dad," he muttered, "she's telling the truth. I didn't stop them. I should have." He broke off, looking down at the floor. Richard's lips pressed together. He laid a hand briefly on his son's shoulder. You'll learn from it. The four of them sat down at Rachel's small kitchen table. She poured more tea, not sure why she was hosting this impromptu summit, but somehow sensing it was important. Over steaming mugs, Richard explained. Ethan lives with me part-time. My ex-wife raised him most of the time, and, let's just say, discipline wasn't her strength. He's not a bad kid, but he's been imitating the wrong people. Ethan shifted, muttering, I'm right here, you know. Rachel arched a brow. Then maybe you should hear this too. You've got more privilege than most kids will ever dream of. That doesn't make you better than anyone. It makes you responsible for how you treat people. Ethan flinched at her words, but didn't argue. Richard leaned back, studying Rachel. You stood up to a group of teenagers in the park. That took guts. And today, at school, you embarrassed my son, yes, but you also opened his eyes. Rachel blinked, caught off guard. You made an impression, Richard said simply. The apartment fell into a strange, thoughtful silence. Grace yawned, her small body finally surrendering to exhaustion. Rachel rose and tucked her into the couch with a blanket. When she returned, Ethan was staring at her, with the hesitant expression of someone about to admit something. Is it true what she said? He asked quietly. That Grace doesn't have clothes for school. That her dad lets people hurt her. Rachel exhaled. Yes, she told me things I wish I could unhear. I'll try to talk to her father, but she shook her head. It rarely ends well. Richard set his mug down with a decisive thud. Then you shouldn't go alone. Tomorrow afternoon, I'm free. I'll come with you. Rachel frowned. Because sometimes people listen when the right person is in the room, Richard said. His tone carried the weight of someone who'd spent his life negotiating power. Rachel looked at him, unsure what to make of this wealthy businessman, suddenly volunteering to fight for a neglected child. She didn't know whether to trust him, yet something in his eyes told her he meant it. And for the first time all day, Rachel felt the tiniest flicker of hope. The next afternoon, Rachel stood outside the school building with Grace's small hand in hers. She'd promised the girl they would stop by her father's apartment together, just to check in. Grace had nodded, though her eyes betrayed fear. A sleek black SUV pulled up to the curb. Richard Donovan stepped out, wearing a simple shirt this time, instead of a business suit. Beside him, Ethan dragged his feet, earbuds dangling around his neck. Ready? Richard asked. Rachel crossed her arms. I still don't know why you want to do this. Richard's gaze softened. Because I know what it's like when a child gets left behind. And because my son needs to see what responsibility looks like. Ethan shot his father a sideways glance, but said nothing. The walk to Grace's apartment complex was short, but each step seemed to weigh on Rachel. The building loomed over them, paint peeling, windows cracked. A group of men smoked near the entrance, their eyes following Rachel as she led Grace past. Grace's tiny fingers gripped Rachel's tighter. The apartment door was unlocked. Inside, the air smelled of stale beer and fried food. Laughter and shouting spilled from the kitchen. Richard pushed the door open wider and walked in first. His presence seemed to fill the space. Rachel followed, guiding Grace behind her. In the kitchen, 3 adults sat around a cluttered table. A man with a half-empty bottle of whiskey in front of him, and 2 women with hard faces and smeared lipstick. One of them sneered as they entered. "Who the hell are you?" Rachel opened her mouth, but Richard beat her to it. He stepped forward, voice low and commanding. "I'm here for Grace Carter. Everyone else out." The man at the table, the father, Mark Carter, looked up blearily. His eyes darted to Richard, then to Rachel, then back to the bottle. The 2 women didn't argue. They slipped out without a word, leaving behind the smell of cheap perfume. Mark slumped back in his chair. "She's my kid. You can't just walk in here." Rachel steadied her breath. "She's bruised, Mark. She told me what's happening here. You've got a choice to make." Richard's voice cut in, firm but measured. "You want to keep your daughter? Then you get help. You sober up. You show up for her. Otherwise," he gestured toward Grace, who clung to Rachel's side like a shadow, "you lose her. She ends up in the system, and you end up dead in a place like this." For a long moment, Mark didn't answer. His hand shook as he poured himself another shot. He drank it in silence. Finally, he muttered, "I'm not a bad guy. I just can't do it." Rachel's heart broke at Grace's quiet whimper, but Richard didn't flinch. He leaned forward, his voice dropping lower, sharper. "Then decide, right now. You either fight for her, or you give her up." The room was heavy with silence. Mark's jaw clenched, his eyes darting toward his daughter, and then away. Shame written across his face. Rachel knelt and pulled Grace close, whispering, "It's going to be okay." For the first time since she'd met her, she wasn't sure if that was true. Rachel carried Grace down the cracked stairwell, her small arms looped around Rachel's neck. Behind them, Richard and Ethan followed in silence. Mark Carter hadn't stopped them. He hadn't fought, hadn't even stood up. He just slumped deeper into his chair with another shot of whiskey, muttering half-hearted promises he had no strength to keep. Outside, the late afternoon sun seemed too bright for the heaviness in Rachel's chest. Grace clung tighter, whispering, "Please, don't make me go back. Please." Rachel swallowed hard. "You're not going back tonight. I promise." Ethan kicked at the sidewalk as they walked toward the SUV. For once, his usual cocky expression was gone. "Dad," he said quietly. He didn't even care, at all. Richard put a hand on his son's shoulder, a rare moment of softness. "That's what addiction does, Ethan. It eats people alive until there's nothing left to care about." Rachel glanced at Richard, surprised at the weary honesty in his tone. She'd expected him to act like a savior, to play the part of the businessman fixing problems with money. But what she heard was experience. Back at her apartment, Grace sat at the kitchen table, staring down at her untouched sandwich. Rachel crouched beside her. "Sweetheart, listen to me. Tonight you'll stay here, okay? We'll figure out tomorrow together." Grace's eyes welled up. "What if they come for me? Julia, she always says she'll find me." Rachel's heart twisted. "She won't. You're safe here." Richard cleared his throat gently. "Rachel, I can make a few calls. There are people I know in social services. The girl doesn't need to go into the system. Not if her father signs temporary custody over." Rachel stiffened.
You mean to you?
Richard's mouth curved in a half smile. No, to you. You're the one she trusts. But I can make sure the paperwork actually moves instead of sitting on some desk for months. Rachel blinked at him, caught between gratitude and suspicion. Why are you doing this? Richard looked at Grace, then at his son slouched on the couch. Because sometimes life gives you a second chance to get something right, and I don't intend to waste it. The room fell into a thoughtful quiet. For the first time in years, Rachel realized she wasn't entirely alone in this fight. 2 days later, Rachel sat in a cramped county office with a stack of paperwork in front of her. Grace swung her legs nervously beside her. Dressed in the cleanest outfit Rachel could put together from a thrift store run the night before, the social worker, a weary woman in her 50s, tapped a pen against the desk. Temporary custody, she murmured, scanning Richard Donovan's signature. Signed by the father, witnessed and expedited. Her eyes flicked toward Richard, who sat calmly across the desk. Not every day a man like you takes an interest in a case like this, Mr. Donovan. Richard's smile was polite, but Rachel caught the flicker of annoyance in his eyes. Every child deserves safety. This girl just happened to cross my path. The worker shrugged, stamped the form, and handed a copy to Rachel. You're her legal guardian until a more permanent arrangement is settled. Rachel folded the papers carefully. Her hands trembled just enough for her to notice. She wasn't a mother. She was barely keeping her own life together. And now, this. When they stepped outside, Ethan shoved his hands into his hoodie pockets.
So, you're basically Grace's mum now.
Rachel glanced at him. His tone wasn't mocking, just curious. I'm her guardian, she corrected. It means I'm responsible for her, for now. Grace looked up, eyes wide. Does that mean I can stay with you?
For real?
Rachel knelt, brushing a strand of hair from the girl's face. Yes, honey. You'll stay with me. No more running. No more cold water. Grace's small arms wrapped around her neck. For a moment, Rachel felt the weight of the world lift. As they walked to the SUV, Ethan lingered behind with his father. Rachel caught a low exchange between them. You actually trust her with all this? Ethan asked. Richard's voice was firm, but quiet. I trust people who act when others look away. That's rarer than you think. Later that evening, back at Rachel's apartment, they all shared dinner, boxed pizza and salad because she hadn't had time to cook. Grace giggled over her third slice, and even Ethan cracked a smile at her antics. Rachel leaned back, watching the unlikely scene unfold. A neglected little girl finally safe, a spoiled teenager seeing the world differently, and a wealthy man who didn't quite fit the role she'd painted him in. For the first time, she wondered if this strange alliance wasn't temporary at all. Rachel woke at dawn to the sound of tiny footsteps padding across her apartment. Grace had crawled into her bed sometime in the night, her small body curled tight like she was afraid of disappearing. Now, in the morning light, Rachel watched her rummage through the dresser drawers with wide-eyed curiosity. Grace, Rachel murmured sleepily, those are my work blouses. The girl spun, clutching one of Rachel's cardigans like treasure. Can I wear it? Just for today? It's soft. Rachel smiled faintly. Sweetheart, that's about 3 sizes too big. But maybe after breakfast.
Motherhood, or something close to it, hadn't been on Rachel's life plan, not at 26. Yet here she was,
Making oatmeal with honey, braiding Grace's hair before school, and writing reminder notes for herself about after-school pickup times. It might have felt overwhelming, except Grace's gratitude made the exhaustion worth it. The child beamed at the smallest kindness. A new pair of socks, a hot bath,
a bedtime story.
but not everyone approved. At school, Principal Everett stopped Rachel in the hall, her smile as brittle as porcelain. "I've heard rumors," Everett said, lowering her voice, "that you've taken a student into your home. I certainly hope that isn't true. It would be highly unprofessional." Rachel's jaw tightened. "It's legal. Temporary custody. I went through the county office." Everett's eyes narrowed. "Legal or not, you're creating complications. We rely on certain families to support this school. I trust you won't stir up more trouble." Rachel wanted to argue, but she forced herself to stay calm. For Grace's sake. "I'm doing what any decent human being would do." As she walked away, her hands trembled with restrained anger. That evening, Richard showed up unannounced, with grocery bags in hand. "Figured you could use some reinforcements," he said, setting them on the counter. Rachel raised an eyebrow. "You? Grocery shopping?"
"Don't look so shocked," he said with a half smile. "I've been known to survive outside of boardrooms."
Ethan trailed behind him, holding a pack of construction paper and markers. He shrugged when Rachel looked his way. "For Grace. Figured she might like drawing or something." Grace's face lit up like Christmas morning. She scrambled to the table, already pulling out crayons. Rachel caught the small, proud smile Richard hid as he watched his son. For once, Ethan wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was just being kind. Later, when Grace had fallen asleep on the couch, surrounded by her new drawings, Richard lingered in the kitchen while Rachel washed dishes. "You're doing well with her," he said quietly. Rachel glanced at him. "I'm making it up as I go." "That's what parenting is," Richard replied. He hesitated, then added, "If you ever feel like you're drowning in it all, you don't have to do this alone." Rachel searched his face. It wasn't a line. It wasn't pity. It was something steadier, almost grounding. And for the first time, the idea of letting someone share the weight didn't terrify her. The knock came just after sunset. Rachel froze mid-skep, a dish towel still in her hand. Grace, sprawled on the floor with her crayons, looked up wide-eyed. "Don't answer," she whispered. But Rachel already knew who it was. Something in her chest told her before she even reached the door. When she opened it, Mark Carter stood there, eyes bloodshot, shirt wrinkled, the stale scent of alcohol clinging to him. But this time, his hands were empty. No bottle, no swagger. Just a man looking smaller than Rachel had ever seen him. "Rachel?" he rasped. "I need to see my daughter." Grace darted behind Rachel's legs. "No, I don't want to!" Mark's face crumpled. "Please, baby girl, just let me talk to you." Rachel's grip on the door tightened. You signed over custody. Grace is safe now. That's what matters. Mark nodded miserably. I know, I was drunk. I wasn't a father. But I can do better. Just give me a chance. Rachel wanted to slam the door. She wanted to scream at him for every bruise on Grace's childhood. But behind the wreck of a man, she caught a glimmer of something she hadn't expected. Shame. Real, gut-wrenching shame. Richard's voice broke the silence. He had come up behind Rachel without her noticing. You don't get to walk back in just because you feel guilty, Mark. Being a father is more than showing up when the bottle's empty. Mark's eyes flicked toward him, narrowing. And who the hell are you? Another man thinking he can fix what's not his business. Richard's jaw tightened, but he stayed calm. I'm someone who cares about this child, which is more than you've managed lately. For a moment, the air felt like it might crack. Grace clung tighter to Rachel, trembling. Finally, Rachel stepped forward, her voice steady. Mark, if you're serious, if you really want to be in her life, then prove it. Get sober, get help. Until then, Grace stays here. Tears rimmed Mark's eyes, but he nodded. I'll try, he whispered. Then he turned and walked down the dim stairwell, shoulders slumped. Rachel shut the door, leaning against it as if it alone held her up. Grace still clung to her waist, whispering, Don't let him take me. Rachel stroked her hair. I won't. Not until it's safe. Richard watched them quietly, his expression unreadable. But in his eyes, Rachel saw it. A respect deeper than words. She hadn't chosen the easy way. She had chosen the right one. The following week, Rachel felt the pressure closing in on her from every direction. Between lesson plans, late-night laundry, and Grace's sudden nightmares, sleep had become a rare luxury. Still, she pushed through, because Grace needed her to. But Principal Everett wasn't making it easier. Rachel was called into her office on Wednesday morning. Everett's tone was clipped, her smile brittle. Miss Miller, parents are talking. They're uncomfortable with you involving yourself so personally in a student's family situation. It reflects poorly on this institution. Rachel sat up straighter. Grace had nowhere safe to go. Would you rather she stayed in a bathroom with cold water for a bed? Everett's eyes narrowed. Your sympathy is clouding your professionalism. If you can't separate the two, perhaps this isn't the right environment for you. The words struck Rachel like a slap, but she swallowed the sting and stood. Then maybe it isn't the right environment for Grace either. And I won't apologize for protecting her. She walked out before Everett could answer, pulse pounding. That evening, Richard appeared at her apartment again, as if he'd sensed the day she'd had. This time, he carried takeout from a little Italian place downtown. You look like you've been through hell, he said gently, setting the bags on the counter. Rachel almost laughed. You could say that. She hesitated, then told him about Everett, about the thinly veiled threat against her job. Richard listened quietly, then leaned against the counter. Do you want me to handle it? Rachel frowned. Handle it? How? I sit on the school board, Richard said matter-of-factly. One call, and Everett's reminded where her priorities should be. For a moment, Rachel was tempted, but something in her resisted. I can't let you fight all my battles. Richard, that's not who I am. His eyes softened. It's not about fighting them for you. It's about making sure you're not punished for doing the right thing. Across the room, Grace was showing Ethan a new drawing. This one of a house with 3 figures standing in front. A little girl in the middle, a woman on one side, a tall man on the other. Ethan chuckled awkwardly. Guess that's us, huh? Grace nodded solemnly. It's my family now. Rachel's heart clenched at the words. When she glanced at Richard, she saw the same flicker of emotion cross his face. Surprise, tenderness, and something else neither of them dared name. For a moment, the chaos of everything else, Everett, Mark, the uncertainty of tomorrow, faded into the background, because right there, in her tiny apartment, Richard smiled. His heart clenched. Something else neither of them dared name. For a moment, the chaos of everything else faded into the background, because right there, in her tiny apartment, something else neither of them dared name. Rachel realized she wasn't standing alone anymore. Winter pressed its weight on the small town. Snow piled high against sidewalks, and the gymnasium was packed, parents jostling for seats, the faint scent of pine from a decorated tree in the corner. Rachel spotted Richard near the back, Ethan beside him. He gave her a small nod, his steady presence grounding her as always. Grace sang in the front row, her voice clear but soft, her eyes searching the crowd until they landed on Rachel. The little girl smiled, and something in Rachel's chest warmed in a way she hadn't known was possible. But afterward, in the milling chaos of coats and greetings, Rachel froze. Mark was there. Sober, clean-shaven, a little thinner. He stood awkwardly near the doorway, clutching a folded piece of paper. Grace stiffened beside her. "Mum," she whispered, the words still strange on her lips when directed at Rachel. Rachel crouched down. "You don't have to go to him. Not unless you want to." Grace shook her head quickly. Mark's eyes filled with tears at the sight. But he didn't move closer. Instead, he held out the paper. "I've been in rehab, 3 months sober today. I'm not asking to take her back. I just wanted you to know I'm trying." Rachel studied him. For the first time, she didn't see just the drunk who had abandoned his daughter. She saw a man fighting his way out of his own ruin. But Grace wasn't ready. Not yet. Maybe not ever. "Keep fighting," Rachel said softly. "That's all you can do." Mark nodded and slipped quietly out into the cold night. Rachel turned and found Richard watching her, pride written plainly on his face. Ethan knelt beside Grace, handing her a paper snowflake he'd made during the concert. "For you," he said shyly. Grace beamed, and for once, Ethan didn't look like he was pretending to be someone else. He just looked happy. Later, as they walked out together, Rachel asked Richard, "Do you think I'm in over my head?" He smiled faintly. "Of course you are. So am I. But maybe that's how we know it's worth it." The snow fell around them in quiet sheets. The town hushed beneath winter's blanket. Grace ran ahead, her laughter echoing, while Ethan jogged after her,
half guarding, half playing. Rachel stood beside Richard, the weight of the past months pressing against her heart. Mark's ghosts, Everett's threats, the constant uncertainty. But for the first time, she didn't feel like she was carrying it alone. She slipped her gloved hand into his. He didn't look down, didn't flinch, just held on firmly as they followed the children into the snowy night. Some things, Rachel thought, were fragile. But some things, like the family you chose, and the one that chose you back, had the power to last. If you like the story, I would be very happy to have your support. Click the thumbs up. And to not miss new stories, subscribe and click on the bell. Thank you from the bottom of my heart, and all the best.